The sound of hammering echoed through the dusty streets of Eldorado Canyon, Nevada, as Rebecca Graham stood outside her late husband's workshop, a faded, closed sign hanging crooked in the window. It was 1878, 3 years since Robert had died in a mining accident, and the town had decided she needed a husband whether she wanted one or not. Every eligible man and several not so eligible had come knocking, each one thinking he would be the one to win her hand, each one leaving with rejection burning in his ears. She was only 26 years old, but the lines around her eyes told stories of grief that aged her beyond her years. Robert had been her childhood sweetheart, and when he died, something inside her had simply closed off like a door slamming shut. The workshop remained untouched, his tools still hanging where he left them, his leather apron still draped over the workbench. People whispered that it was unhealthy, that she needed to move on, but Rebecca did not care what people whispered. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as she swept the wooden porch of her small house next to the workshop. Dust swirled around her boots, settling back down the moment she stopped moving. That was life in Nevada, she thought. Everything you tried to clean just came back dirtier. Mrs. Graham. The voice made her look up. Harold Peterson stood at the bottom of her steps, hat in his hands, his balding head already turning pink in the sun. He owned the general store and had asked for her hand at least 6 times in the past year. Mr. Peterson. Her voice was polite but cold. I was wondering if you might reconsider my offer. I have a good business, a fine house. You would want for nothing. I want for nothing now. But a woman alone, it is not proper. Rebecca set down her broom and looked him straight in the eye. Mr. Peterson, I have told you before, and I will tell you one final time. I am not interested in remarrying. Not to you, not to anyone. I would appreciate it if you would respect my wishes. Harold Peterson's face reddened, though whether from embarrassment or anger she could not tell. He jammed his hat back on his head and walked away without another word. She watched him go, feeling nothing but relief. The town of Eldorado Canyon sat in a harsh landscape of red rock and sparse vegetation. It had sprung up around the silver mines that scarred the nearby mountains, and it lived and died by the fortunes pulled from the earth. When Robert died, crushed by a cave-in that had also taken 4 other men, Rebecca had received sympathy but no real help. The mine owner had given her $50 and his condolences. $50 for her husband's life. She had survived by selling the furniture Robert had made, piece by piece. He had been talented, his hands capable of coaxing beauty from raw wood. Each sale had felt like losing him again, but she needed to eat. Now the workshop stood empty except for his tools, and she had taken in sewing work to make ends meet. The rest of the day passed in familiar routine. She hemmed 2 dresses for the banker's wife, mended a shirt for the blacksmith, and began work on a christening gown for a baby she would never hold. Her fingers moved automatically, her mind elsewhere, always elsewhere. Evening brought cooler air but no real relief from the heat. Rebecca sat on her porch with a cup of weak tea, watching the town settle into night. Lamps flickered on in windows. Men stumbled out of the saloon, their laughter harsh and loud. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. She was about to go inside when she noticed a figure leading a horse down the main street. It was too dark to make out details, but something about the way he moved caught her attention. He walked with purpose, but without hurry, his hand resting lightly on his horse's neck. As he passed under a street lamp, she saw he wore dusty traveling clothes and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a stranger. The town got them occasionally, men passing through looking for work or running from something. They rarely stayed long. Eldorado Canyon was not the kind of place that encouraged settling. Rebecca watched him until he disappeared into the stable, then went inside and locked her door. It was nothing to do with her. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Rebecca walked to the general store to buy thread, dreading the encounter with Harold Peterson but having no choice. She needed supplies. The store was blessedly empty except for Peterson himself, who greeted her with stiff formality. She made her purchases quickly and was counting out coins when the door opened behind her. "Morning," a male voice said, low and pleasant. "Morning," Peterson replied, his tone notably warmer than it had been with her. "You are new in town. Just passing through. Need some provisions for the road." Rebecca glanced over her shoulder and saw the stranger from the night before. In daylight, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were an unusual gray-green, and they met hers for just a moment before he nodded politely and turned his attention to the shelves. She finished her transaction and left, unsettled in a way she could not name. There had been nothing improper in that brief glance, nothing forward, yet something about it had stirred something she thought long dead. Back home, she tried to focus on her sewing but found her thoughts wandering. She pricked her finger twice, something she never did, and finally set the work aside in frustration. A knock at the door made her jump. Through the window, she could see Thomas Dalton, the stranger, standing on her porch holding his hat. For a moment, she considered not answering. But curiosity, that dangerous thing, made her open the door. "Mrs. Graham." His voice was even more pleasant up close, with a slight accent she could not place. "Texas, maybe, or farther south." "Yes. My name is Thomas Dalton. I hope I am not disturbing you, madam." "I was speaking with the stable master, and he mentioned you might have a room to let." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "I have no room to let." "Ah." He looked embarrassed. "My apologies. He must have been mistaken. I will trouble you no further." He was turning to leave when Rebecca found herself saying, "Wait." He turned back, one eyebrow raised questioningly. She did not know what made her say it. Perhaps it was the way he had asked politely instead of demanding. Perhaps it was the weariness she saw in his eyes that matched her own. Perhaps it was simply that she was tired of being alone. "I do not have a room, but I have a workshop. It has not been used in some years. There is no bed, but it is dry and clean." "That would be more than adequate, madam. I would pay fair rent." "Where are you headed, Mr. Dalton?" "Nowhere in particular. I am looking for work, and this seems as good a place as any to look." There was a story there, she could tell, but she did not pry. Everyone had stories in the West, and most of them were not happy. "The workshop is $5 a month. You would have access to the well, but not the house. More than fair." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out bills. "First and last month, if that suits you." She took the money, feeling strange about the whole transaction. "I will get the key." The workshop had a separate entrance from the street. Rebecca unlocked the door and pushed it open, her heart clenching at the familiar smell of wood and oil. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that fell through the window. "My husband was a carpenter," she heard herself say. "He died 3 years ago. I am sorry for your loss." Thomas said it simply, without the platitudes most people offered. He stepped inside and looked around at the tools on the walls, the sturdy workbench, the half-finished chair in the corner. He was skilled. "Yes." "Would you mind if I used the tools? I have some experience with woodworking. I could make you a bed frame for in here in exchange. You may use whatever you need." The words came out softer than she intended. He nodded, still looking around. "This is a good space. I will try to be quiet and not disturb you. I rise early and work during the day. Do as you please." There seemed to be nothing more to say, so Rebecca left him there and returned to her house. Through her window, she could see him leading his horse into the small yard behind the workshop, where there was shade and room for the animal to move. He took his time with the horse, brushing it down and checking its hooves with gentle, practiced hands. By afternoon, she heard the sound of sawing. He was already at work. The sound should have bothered her, should have felt like an intrusion, but instead it was almost comforting. The workshop was alive again, even if only temporarily. 3 days passed. Thomas Dalton kept to himself, leaving early in the mornings to look for work and returning in the evenings to labor on his bed frame. Rebecca saw him occasionally when she went to the well, and they would exchange polite greetings, nothing more. On the 4th day, Harold Peterson appeared on her doorstep again, his face pinched with disapproval. "Mrs. Graham, people are talking. People always talk, Mr. Peterson. You have a man living on your property. It is not decent. I have a tenant renting my workshop." "What is not decent about that? An unmarried woman and an unmarried man, it will cause scandal." Rebecca felt her temper, usually well controlled, begin to rise. "Mr. Peterson, I have refused your proposals multiple times. That gives you no right to monitor my life or my decisions." "I am thinking of your reputation." "No, you are thinking of your pride. Good day." She closed the door in his face, her heart pounding with anger. That evening, as she sat on her porch in the cooling air, Thomas emerged from the workshop and approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Graham, I could not help but overhear earlier. If my presence here is causing you difficulties, I will find other lodging." She looked at him, standing there in the fading light with sawdust in his hair and genuine concern in his eyes, and made a decision. "You will do no such thing. The difficulties are not of your making, and I will not be bullied by small-minded busybodies." A slight smile crossed his face. "You are quite fierce when you are angry." "You have no idea," she said, then surprised herself by smiling back. He sat down on the porch steps, keeping a respectful distance. "I found work today. The livery stable needs help, and the blacksmith has more business than he can handle alone. It is not skilled work, but it is honest. That is good." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear. It was the most peaceful Rebecca had felt in months. "May I ask you something, Mrs. Graham?" "You may." "The stable master said you have refused every suitor in town. Is that true?" "It is." "May I ask why?" Rebecca considered the question. Most people she would have told to mind their own business, but there was something about Thomas Dalton that invited honesty. "Because none of them wanted me. They wanted a housekeeper, or they wanted respectability, or they wanted someone to take care of them in their old age. Not one of them has ever asked what I wanted." "What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca realized no one had ever asked her that before. Not even Robert, though she had loved him dearly. They had married because it was expected, because they were young and it seemed like the right thing to do. "I do not know any more," she said quietly. "I thought I knew once. Now I am just trying to survive each day." Thomas nodded. "I understand that feeling. Why are you drifting, Mr. Dalton? A man with your skills could settle anywhere." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I had a ranch once down in Texas. Lost it to drought and debt. Lost my parents to fever the same year. Sometimes it is easier to keep moving than to stay still and remember." "Yes," Rebecca said. "I understand that feeling too." Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Thomas worked during the day and spent his evenings building furniture in the workshop. Rebecca sewed and took care of her small household. They would see each other at the well, or in passing, and exchange a few words. Sometimes Thomas would sit on the porch steps in the evening, and they would talk about nothing important, just the weather or the town gossip or the quality of the coffee at the hotel restaurant. It was easy, Rebecca realized. Being around him was easy in a way nothing had been since Robert died. He never pushed, never demanded, never expected anything from her. He was just there, solid and steady, like a tree that had weathered many storms. Harold Peterson continued to glare whenever he saw them together, but Rebecca ignored him. Other suitors had stopped coming around entirely, apparently deciding that the widow was too much trouble. That suited her just fine. One evening in late September, when the brutal summer heat had finally begun to ease, Rebecca heard a crash from the workshop followed by cursing. She hurried over and found Thomas sitting on the floor, his hand bleeding, broken glass scattered around him. What happened? Dropped a jar of nails, tried to catch it, stupid. He looked embarrassed and in pain. Come inside, I need to clean that. I will get blood on your floor. Floors can be washed. Come on. He followed her into her house, the first time he had been inside since that initial day. She sat him at her kitchen table and pumped water into a basin, then gently took his hand in hers. The cut was deep but clean. She washed it carefully, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. He watched her face as she worked, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. This needs stitches, she said. I cannot afford the doctor. I can do it. I have done it before. Robert had been clumsy with tools sometimes, always cutting himself. She found her sewing kit and threaded a needle with the finest thread she had. This will hurt. I have had worse. She believed him. His hands were scarred with old injuries, his arms marked with the kind of lines that came from hard living. The first stitch made him tense, but he did not pull away. She worked quickly and efficiently, her own hands steady despite the strange intimacy of the act. When she finished and tied off the thread, she wrapped his hand in clean cloth. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You are welcome." He did not move to leave, and she did not step away. They were close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes, could smell the sawdust and honest sweat on his skin. "Rebecca," he said, using her first name for the first time, "may I ask you something?" Her heart was beating too fast. "Yes." "Would you consider allowing me to court you?" The question was so unexpected, so direct and honest that she could only stare at him. "I know I have nothing to offer," he continued. "No land, no money to speak of, just work-worn hands and a borrowed room. But I find myself thinking about you all the time. The way you look in the morning sunlight, the sound of your voice, the strength in you that you try to hide. I would count it the greatest honor of my life if you would give me a chance." Rebecca's eyes stung with sudden tears. "You do not know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind, even when people do not deserve it. I know you are brave, standing alone against a town that wants to tell you how to live. I know you are loyal, keeping your husband's memory alive even when it hurts. I know you are beautiful, though I do not think you believe it anymore. Thomas." His name came out as barely a whisper. "I am not asking you to marry me. I am not even asking you to love me. I am just asking for a chance. One chance. If you say no, I will respect that and never mention it again." But I had to ask. She thought about all the men who had proposed to her over the past 3 years, the ones who had listed their assets like they were negotiating a business deal, the ones who had assured her she would be well taken care of, as if she were a child or an invalid. The ones who had told her what she needed, what she should do, how she should feel. Not one of them had asked for a chance. They had all assumed, demanded, expected. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes. Yes, you may court me." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. He left soon after, claiming he needed to rest his hand, but she suspected he was giving her space to process what had just happened. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time, looking at the basin of pinkish water, the bloody cloths, the needle and thread she had used. What had she done? But even as she questioned herself, she felt something unfurling in her chest. Not the desperate, all-consuming love she had felt for Robert in their youth. Something quieter, steadier, something that felt like hope. The courting began slowly. Thomas would walk with her to the general store, carrying her purchases. He fixed the loose step on her porch without being asked. He left wildflowers on her doorstep, the kind that grew stubbornly in the desert, refusing to be killed by heat and drought. They talked more real conversations that lasted into the night. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his parents who had homesteaded when it was still dangerous, about learning to work with his hands because they had no money for hired help. She told him about Robert, about their childhood together, about the guilt she felt for surviving when he had not. "That is not guilt," Thomas said gently. "That is grief, and grief is just love with nowhere to go." The words unlocked something in her. She cried that night for the first time since the funeral, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas held her on the porch steps, not saying anything, just being solid and present while she fell apart. When she finally stopped, exhausted and empty, he said, "Loving him does not mean you cannot love again. The heart is not a finite thing. It grows to hold what we give it." "How did you get so wise?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "I am not wise. I am just someone who has lost everything and had to learn how to build a life from nothing. You do not have to rush this, Rebecca. We have time." But time, it turned out, was something they might not have. A week later, a well-dressed man arrived in town driving a fine carriage. He took a room at the hotel and began asking questions about the silver mines. Within days, word spread that he was a representative for a large mining company out of San Francisco. They were interested in buying up the claims around Eldorado Canyon. Thomas heard the news at the livery stable and came to tell Rebecca immediately. "This could change everything," he said. "If they buy the mines, they will bring in their own workers. Half the town makes its living supporting the miners." "What will you do?" she asked. "I do not know. I have been thinking about moving on anyway. Maybe head north to Colorado or west to California. There is always work for someone willing to do it." He paused. "I would understand if you wanted to end things between us. No sense starting something if I am just going to leave." Rebecca felt panic rise in her chest. The thought of him leaving, of going back to the gray numbness that had been her life before, was suddenly unbearable. "What if I went with you?" Thomas stared at her. "What? What if I went with you? There is nothing keeping me here. This house was Robert's dream, not mine. The town has never been particularly kind to me. I have no family, no real ties. What if I just left?" "Rebecca, you cannot append your whole life for someone you have known for 2 months. Why not? People do it all the time. They get married to virtual strangers and move across the country. At least I know you, at least I trust you. Trust and love are not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "But maybe trust is a better foundation. Maybe love can grow from trust instead of the other way around." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. "I have nothing to offer you," he said again. "You have yourself. That is enough. I would want to do it properly. I would want to marry you before we left. I will not have people thinking ill of you." "Are you asking me to marry you, Thomas Dalton?" "I suppose I am. Though this is probably the worst proposal in the history of proposals." Rebecca laughed, a real laugh that came from deep in her belly. "You would be surprised. I have heard worse. Is that a yes?" She thought about all the proposals she had refused, all the men who had offered her security, stability, respectability. None of it had mattered because none of them had offered what Thomas was offering now, a partnership, a chance, a leap into the unknown together. "Yes," she said. "That is a yes." They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with the blacksmith and his wife as witnesses. Rebecca wore her best dress, dark blue cotton she had made herself. Thomas wore a new shirt he had bought specially for the occasion, though he kept his worn leather vest. Harold Peterson was conspicuously absent, which suited everyone just fine. After the ceremony, they had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury Rebecca had not indulged in years. The food was mediocre, but she barely tasted it anyway. She was too busy watching Thomas, her husband, as he talked about their plans. "I thought we could head west first," he said. "See if there is any work in the California gold camps. If not, we can go north. I have heard good things about Oregon, about the farmland there. I do not know anything about farming. Neither did I before my parents started homesteading. We will figure it out together. Together." The words sent a thrill through her. That night, they went to the workshop where Thomas had been staying. He had built a proper bed frame, sturdy and simple, and Rebecca had brought linens from the house. It was strange and wonderful and awkward all at once, this intimacy with someone who was not Robert. But Thomas was patient and gentle, and when he kissed her, she found herself responding with a passion she had thought long dead. They moved together slowly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies, and when it was over, Rebecca lay in his arms and felt more alive than she had in 3 years. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I am more than all right." She turned to look at him in the lamplight. "I am happy. I had forgotten what that felt like." He kissed her forehead. "I will do everything in my power to keep you happy. I know you will." They spent the next week preparing to leave. Rebecca sold the house and workshop to a young couple who had just arrived in town, newlyweds looking to start fresh. She kept only what would fit in a wagon: clothes, basic supplies, her sewing kit, and one of Robert's hand-carved wooden boxes. Everything else she sold or gave away. It should have felt like loss, but instead it felt like freedom. The morning they left, the sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. They had a sturdy wagon Thomas had bought with his savings, pulled by 2 reliable horses. Their worldly possessions were packed in the back, covered with canvas against dust and weather. Rebecca took one last look at Eldorado Canyon, this town that had been her home for 5 years. She felt no sadness, no regret, only anticipation for what lay ahead. "Ready?" Thomas asked from the driver's seat. "Ready." They headed west, following the rough roads that led toward California. The journey was hard, the landscape unforgiving, but Rebecca did not mind. Every mile took them farther from the past and closer to whatever future they would build together. They traveled for 3 weeks, camping under the stars at night, talking and laughing and learning more about each other with every passing day. Thomas taught her how to handle the horses, how to build a proper campfire, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. She taught him her father's old songs, how to mend clothes properly, how to make decent coffee even with terrible water. They fell into an easy rhythm, partners in the truest sense. And somewhere along the way, Rebecca realized she had fallen in love with him. Not the desperate, consuming love of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. A love built on respect and trust and the simple pleasure of being together. They reached Sacramento in October as the first hints of autumn began to touch the air. It was a bustling city, full of noise and commerce and opportunity. Thomas found work almost immediately as a carpenter, and they rented a small house on the outskirts of town. Life settled into a new pattern. Thomas worked 6 days a week, building everything from furniture to houses to coffins. Rebecca took in sewing and discovered she had a talent for dressmaking. Her creations were admired, and soon she had more work than she could handle. They saved every penny they could, planning for the future. Thomas wanted land, a place they could truly call their own. Rebecca wanted children, though she was afraid to say so at first, afraid it would seem like she was trying to replace what she had lost. But one night, as they lay in bed with the window open to catch the breeze, she found the courage. "Thomas, do you want children?" He was quiet for a moment. "I do, but only if you do. I know you lost Robert, and I would never want you to feel like I was trying to take his place." "You are not taking his place. You have your own place, and yes, I want children with you." He pulled her close and kissed her deeply. "Then we will have children." "As many as you want." She laughed against his mouth. "Let us start with one and see how it goes." By spring, Rebecca was pregnant. The morning sickness was terrible, but she did not mind. Every wave of nausea was proof of new life, new hope, new beginnings. Thomas was impossibly excited and impossibly anxious. He read every book on childbirth he could find, asked advice from every woman they knew, and drove Rebecca half crazy with his hovering. But she found it endearing, this proof that he cared. The baby came in December, a squalling, red-faced boy they named David Robert Dalton. Thomas cried when he held his son for the first time, great tears rolling down his face as he marveled at the tiny fingers and toes. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect, both of you." Rebecca, exhausted and sore and happier than she had ever been, could only smile. They stayed in Sacramento for 3 more years. David grew from infant to toddler, a rambunctious child with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Rebecca became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Thomas's mother. Then came another son, James, born 2 years later. By then, they had saved enough for the land Thomas had always dreamed of. They found a homestead in the Sacramento Valley, 160 acres of rich soil perfect for farming. It was hard work, brutal work, but they tackled it together. Thomas built them a house, bigger than anything Rebecca had ever lived in, with a real wood floor and glass windows. He built a barn for the animals they slowly accumulated: chickens, a milk cow, pigs, eventually horses. He built furniture to fill the house, each piece crafted with love and skill. Rebecca planted a garden that grew vegetables and herbs and flowers. She continued her sewing, making clothes for the children and taking commissions from neighboring farms. She learned to cook on a wood stove, to preserve food for winter, to do 100 things she had never needed to know in town. The children grew. David, serious and thoughtful like his mother, loved books and learning. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and catching frogs. James was the gentle one, happiest when he was helping his father in the workshop. They were not rich, not by any measure, but they were happy. The farm provided for their needs, and they had each other. That was enough. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Rebecca by taking her to San Francisco for a weekend. It was the first time they had been away from the farm and the children, who stayed with a neighboring family. They stayed in a real hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights, luxuries that seemed almost sinful after years of farm living. They ate in restaurants, walked along the waterfront, saw a theatrical performance that made Rebecca laugh until she cried. On their last night, as they walked back to the hotel under the gas street lamps, Thomas stopped and pulled her into his arms. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving Eldorado Canyon with a stranger, giving up your old life?" Rebecca looked up at him, this man who had asked just once and changed everything. His hair was graying at the temples now, and lines bracketed his mouth and eyes, but to her he was more handsome than ever. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me back my life, Thomas." You made me remember how to be happy. You did the same for me. I was just drifting before you, no purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to put down roots. They kissed there on the street, not caring who might see. After all these years, the passion between them had not dimmed. If anything, it had deepened, mellowed into something richer and more satisfying than the desperate heat of new love. They returned to the farm renewed and recommitted to each other and to the life they were building. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Rebecca's dressmaking business grew until she had apprentices helping her, young women from neighboring farms who wanted to learn a trade. Thomas's reputation as a craftsman spread, and people came from miles around to commission furniture. David went to college in San Francisco, the first in either of their families to do so. He studied law and came home during summers to help on the farm, full of ideas and enthusiasm. Sarah, true to her nature, refused every suitor who came calling until she met a cowboy at a county fair. He was rough around the edges but kind-hearted, and when Sarah announced she was marrying him, Rebecca and Thomas gave their blessing. The wedding was held on the farm, a joyous celebration that lasted 2 days. James stayed close to home, taking over more of the farm work as Thomas grew older. He married a quiet girl from the neighboring farm, and they built a small house on the far corner of the property. More grandchildren came, filling the house with noise and laughter. Rebecca taught them to sew and cook, told them stories about the old days in Nevada, about their grandfather's carpentry skills. Thomas built them toys and told them about growing up in Texas, about cattle drives and prairie storms and the importance of honest work. They grew old together, Thomas and Rebecca. His hands became gnarled with arthritis, making fine woodwork difficult, but he never stopped creating. Her eyes grew weak, making tiny stitches impossible, but she continued to design dresses and direct her apprentices. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch of the house Thomas had built, watching the sun set over the fields they had cultivated, surrounded by the life they had made. "You remember that day in Eldorado Canyon?" Rebecca asked one evening. They were both in their 60s now, their children grown, their grandchildren running wild in the yard. "When you asked to court me, I remember being terrified you would say no. I almost did. I was so convinced I would never feel anything again. What made you say yes?" Rebecca thought about it. "You asked for a chance instead of assuming you deserved one. You saw me as a person, not a problem to be solved or a prize to be won. And you were patient. You did not push." Thomas took her hand, his calloused palm familiar and dear. "Best decision I ever made asking you. Best decision you ever made saying yes. We have had a good life, have we not? The best. Better than I ever thought possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play. The oldest, David's son, was teaching the younger ones how to throw a rope. Sarah's daughter was climbing the old oak tree despite her mother's protests. James's twin boys were rolling in the dirt with the farm dogs. "I think about Robert sometimes," Rebecca said quietly. "I hope he would be happy for me, for us. I am sure he would be. Love is not a limited thing, remember. You can love his memory and love me at the same time. They are not in competition." "When did you get so wise?" Thomas laughed. "I am not wise, I am just old. Old and wise and mine. Always yours." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rebecca reflected on the strange path her life had taken. From a grieving widow in a dusty Nevada town to this, a thriving farm, a growing family, a love that had weathered every storm. All because a stranger cowboy had asked just once. The years continued their gentle march. Thomas's health began to fail slowly, his strong body finally succumbing to a lifetime of hard work. Rebecca cared for him with the same patience and devotion he had shown her in those early days. On a warm spring morning with the windows open and the smell of fruit blossoms drifting in, Thomas Dalton died peacefully in his sleep, Rebecca holding his hand. The grief was profound, but different from when she had lost Robert. That loss had been sudden and violent, leaving her shattered and alone. This was a slow ache, the pain of losing a partner who had walked beside her through decades of life. But she was not alone this time. Her children rallied around her, and her grandchildren filled the house with love and noise. They helped her through the darkest days, just as Thomas would have wanted. Rebecca lived another 15 years, dying at the age of 81 in the house Thomas had built, surrounded by 3 generations of the family they had created together. On her last day, lucid and calm, she gathered her children around her bed. "I want you to know," she told them, her voice weak but clear, "that I have had the most extraordinary life. I have known great love twice, and I am grateful for both. I have built something that will last beyond me, and that is all anyone can hope for." David took her hand. "We will make sure the farm stays in the family. James and his sons will keep it going. I know you will." She smiled at each of them in turn. "Take care of each other. Love fiercely but kindly. Be patient with people's pain. You never know what burdens they are carrying." Sarah was crying openly now. "We will miss you so much, and I will miss you. But I am tired, my darlings, so very tired, and your father is waiting for me, I can feel it." As the sun set on that spring evening, Rebecca closed her eyes and let go, slipping away as gently as a leaf falling from a tree. They buried her next to Thomas in the small cemetery on the edge of their property, under an oak tree he had planted 40 years earlier. The whole community came to pay their respects, not just family but neighbors, customers, apprentices, and friends accumulated over a lifetime. The farm continued to thrive under James's care. David became a successful lawyer, eventually a judge, known for his fairness and wisdom. Sarah's children carried on the cowboy tradition, running cattle on land they bought in Montana. The grandchildren grew up and had children of their own, spreading across the West, but always coming back to the farm for important occasions. And in the town records of Eldorado Canyon, Nevada, there was a brief notation in faded ink. Rebecca Graham, widow, departed town October 1878 with new husband Thomas Dalton. Destination unknown. Unknown, perhaps, but hardly unremarkable. Because in that moment when Rebecca said yes to a stranger cowboy who asked just once, she had set in motion a legacy that would last for generations. Not a legacy of wealth or fame, but something more valuable. A family built on love and respect, perseverance and partnership. The story of their life together became family legend, told and retold to new generations. The tale of the widow who refused every suitor until the right man asked the right way. The story of 2 broken people who found healing in each other. The proof that sometimes the best things in life come when you are brave enough to say yes to possibility. The old house still stood decades later, weathered but sound, a testament to Thomas's skill and Rebecca's determination. The workshop where they first spoke of courting remained, converted now into storage but still holding some of Thomas's original tools, preserved as heirlooms. And on quiet evenings, when the light slanted just right across the porch where they had sat for so many years, you could almost see them there. An older couple, hands clasped, watching the sun set over the land they had tamed together, over the life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work, and a single question asked in an Eldorado Canyon workshop one distant autumn day. One chance. That was all it took. One chance freely given, gratefully received, and nurtured into something beautiful and lasting. In the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.